What happens when science uncovers an answer so unsettling, so reality-shifting, that the discovery is quietly sealed away, sometimes buried, sometimes rewritten, sometimes simply erased? Tonight, we dive into 10 mysteries scientists solved but the answers were erased from records. A journey into the forgotten corridors of human knowledge, where breakthroughs flickered briefly before being smothered by silence. Across archives, abandoned research facilities, and missing government memos, there are patterns, moments where someone found the truth, and then the truth disappeared. Why? Who decided what humanity shouldn't remember? And what fragments still survive despite every attempt to hide them? As you watch, stay curious. There's always more beneath the surface than officials, or history books, care to admit. And if you love uncovering lost knowledge, feel free to tap the like button early. It tells me to keep going deeper. Number 10 is the vanished map of the Earth's missing coastline. In 1893, geologist Gilbert Ellis Bailey published a puzzling observation: an unusual pattern of submerged continental shelves that didn't match modern erosion rates. His report, printed in the Bulletin of the Geological Society of America, described ancient shorelines located far deeper than any known sea level change could explain. The paper existed, briefly. Then, within 2 decades, only scattered references to it remained. The original maps Bailey created, the ones colleagues later called impossibly detailed, simply stopped appearing in academic catalogues. What he claimed to observe was a series of linear formations stretching along the Atlantic floor. Too straight, too uniform, too deliberate to be the random scars of geology. Bailey never said they were artificial. He only noted they were anomalously engineered by forces unknown. But that phrase was enough for the US Geological Survey to quietly distance itself from his work. By the 1920s, oceanographers attempting to replicate Bailey's findings reported a strange obstacle. The bathymetric records he referenced were no longer accessible. Some were misfiled, others lost in transfer, and a handful were supposedly damaged in warehouse flooding. Yet researchers at the time noted something odd. The missing documents all pertained to the same depth range and the same general region of the North Atlantic. Today, we can only reconstruct Bailey's observations from secondary mentions, scientific breadcrumbs scattered across an era when oceanic mapping was still in its infancy. His lost map implied that the world once looked dramatically different, shaped by an event or civilization that predated the oldest known cultures. But without the map itself, the evidence hangs in a liminal space, not disproven, not confirmed, simply unwelcome. It raises a haunting question. Why erase the earliest attempts to chart the ocean floor? Why hide the possibility that someone, or something, may have shaped our planet long before geology dared to imagine? If this is what vanished at number 10, what else lies beneath the surface as we continue down this list? Number 9 is the experiment that predicted a human mindprint. In 1972, deep inside a research wing of Stanford University, cognitive scientists conducted a little-known project exploring whether human decision-making leaves behind a measurable pattern signature, a kind of behavioral fingerprint that persists across situations. The project's internal name was the Continuity of Cognition Study. It wasn't classified, but it was never widely published either, because its conclusions were considered too speculative for the era. Yet one piece of evidence from that study did make it into public record. A conference abstract submitted by psychologist Amos Tversky, briefly mentioning a consistent choice structure bias found across unrelated tasks. That abstract still exists today, a thin sliver of proof that the study was real. But the full report, the one early researchers later claimed demonstrated a repeatable mental blueprint underpinning all complex decisions, vanished from Stanford's archives by the late 1980s. Not misplaced, vanished. What the researchers believed they'd uncovered was a stable cognitive rhythm, a predictable way the brain maps uncertainty, emotion, and memory together. According to a surviving personal letter from one of the junior researchers, the team thought they had detected the closest thing to a psychological constant. If the mind had a signature, a traceable structure, then human behavior, everything from negotiation to intuition, might be fundamentally predictable. That idea was powerful. Too powerful, some said. The controversy didn't come from conspiracy theories. It came from academia itself. If human judgment could be reduced to patterns, then fields built on the assumption of free, independent decision-making would face an uncomfortable dilemma. Several departments pushed back. The study's funding wasn't renewed. Teams were reassigned, and the original documentation dissolved into a fog of missing boxes and temporarily removed files. Yet what remains is tantalizing. A single acknowledged abstract, a few recollections in old interviews, and the persistent rumor among behavioral scientists that someone, somewhere, continued the research under a different name. Because if a mindprint exists, if every person carries a predictable cognitive pattern, then understanding it wouldn't just explain decisions. It could anticipate them, influence them, maybe even rewrite them. And perhaps that is the real reason the study faded from academic history. Knowledge doesn't have to be forbidden to disappear. It only needs to be inconvenient. Number 8 is the glacier that recorded a sound no one could explain. High in the Ellsworth Mountains of Antarctica, researchers from the British Antarctic Survey drilled a deep ice core in 1965, one of the earliest attempts to capture ancient climate data from the continent's interior. The expedition's official logs, which are publicly accessible, describe a moment when the drill struck a thin, exceptionally clear layer of ice unlike anything encountered before. Inside that layer, researchers reported hearing a faint tonal vibration when the segment was tapped, an acoustic anomaly mentioned briefly in the expedition's published summary. It was a small detail, almost a curiosity, but it became the only surviving record of what the team discovered next. When the core segment thawed in a controlled melt chamber, a soft humming resonance was reportedly captured on primitive magnetic tape. According to a field technician's later interview, the frequency was too structured, too steady to be natural. But before the tape could be independently examined, it was shipped back to London with the rest of the samples. That tape never appeared in the archives. The scientists, bound by protocol, moved on to other projects. Decades passed. Funding shifted. The original logbooks remained, but the anomalous tape, its existence confirmed only by the official 1965 field summary and one surviving mention in a memo cataloging returned materials, had vanished. Some believe it was simply lost in bureaucratic shuffle. Others think the recording was quietly discarded because it invited uncomfortable questions. How could ice, older than most civilizations, preserve a sound with harmonic structure? Glaciers record temperature, dust, volcanic eruptions, but not melodies. And yet the technicians insisted they heard something organized, something almost intentional. Modern acoustics experts point out that resonant frequencies can emerge naturally in pressurized ice layers. But even that explanation fails to account for the structured pattern the team described. 3 repeating tones at regular intervals. The deeper mystery lies in the ice layer itself. Geological analysis from the surviving core samples shows it formed during a sudden cooling event roughly 12,000 years ago, a period already associated with global turbulence. If something happened then, something loud, something powerful, Antarctica may have captured it like a frozen phonograph. But without the tape, the sound remains a ghost in scientific memory, acknowledged once, then allowed to fade. Number 7 is the photograph NASA developed, then buried. In 1967, during the early operations of the Applications Technology satellite program, NASA's Earth-observing instruments captured a series of high-altitude images meant to test new infrared scanning techniques. Most of these images, cloud maps, heat signatures, and weather patterns, were published in routine technical summaries. But one image, referenced only once in a declassified NASA Goddard Space Flight Center memo from that same year, described an unusual geometric formation detected in the Sahara's Tenere Desert. That memo is the sole verified piece of evidence that the image ever existed. In it, a project engineer notes that the structure appeared exceedingly regular in symmetry and extended too far beneath the surface to be explained by dunes or wind erosion. The infrared profile suggested the object had cooled at a different rate than the surrounding desert floor, implying a composition unlike any known natural formation. The photograph should have been archived alongside thousands of others. But when researchers in the 1990s attempted to locate it during a retrospective review of early satellite imaging, there was nothing. No microfilm, no catalog entry, no degraded copy. Only that single memo, dry and bureaucratic, written in the neutral tone of someone who didn't yet realize what they were describing, would soon be treated as an inconvenience. What could have produced a geometric pattern large enough to be mistaken for a desert plateau, yet structured enough to catch the attention of engineers who'd seen countless anomalies? Some speculated it was an ancient buried complex, older than recorded civilization, reclaimed by sand and time. Others argued it could have been a mirage-like scanning artifact. But even that explanation falters, as the memo specifically noted thermal consistency across multiple passes, something a malfunction couldn't produce twice. Then the story gets stranger. Within months of the memo, the entire imaging batch from that day's pass was reclassified for internal quality assessment. Most of those photos later resurfaced, except the one. What remains is a shadow, a missing photograph, and a brief mention in a real NASA document acknowledging it. A formation that wasn't supposed to be there, and then wasn't allowed to be seen again. If something in the desert defied explanation in 1967, imagine what might still lie buried under those sands, waiting for another lens, another satellite, or another moment of accidental discovery. Number 6 is the medical report that described a human with impossible healing. In 1934, a young physician named Dr. Charles L. Thompson submitted a case summary to the Journal of the American Medical Association describing a patient whose wounds healed with what he called unprecedented rapidity. The publication accepted his letter, but printed only a shortened version. Yet even that truncated entry still exists in JAMA's archival index today. It documents a middle-aged man whose lacerations closed within hours, whose bruises vanished almost overnight, and whose blood work showed anomalously accelerated cellular regeneration. The surviving summary is bland, clinical, restrained. But the longer report, the one Dr. Thompson claimed included lab notes, microscope photographs, and time-stamped observations, never appeared in the issue, nor did it appear in any medical library afterward. Thompson himself wrote in a later correspondence that his full submission had been redirected for further review, and he never saw it again. What's remarkable isn't just the vanishing report, it's what happened to the physician. Within a year, Thompson abruptly left clinical practice, withdrew from research, and moved to a rural town in Maine, where he lived quietly for the rest of his life. Colleagues who attempted to contact him about the case said he refused to discuss it. One medical historian recounted that Thompson reacted with visible fear when asked whether the patient had been part of a study or government referral. The details we do have from the published fragment are unsettling enough. The patient's red blood cells reproduced at a rate nearly triple the observed norm. White blood cell response appeared pre-activated, as if the immune system anticipated injury before it happened. And the skin sample exhibited a collagen density not seen in any known pathology. Modern physicians reviewing the fragment speculate that Thompson may have misinterpreted a rare endocrine or autoimmune condition. But that doesn't explain the disappearance of the full report, or the physician's sudden retreat from medicine. The idea of accelerated regeneration isn't new. It appears in myth, in folklore, in the margins of medical speculation. But here's what makes Thompson's case unusual. It was documented. Publicly, briefly, and then quietly diluted into a footnote while the detailed observations evaporated from the official record. If a single human once exhibited healing beyond anything science can explain, it would challenge everything from trauma care to physiology. Maybe the disappearance wasn't about the patient's anomaly, but about who might want to study it outside public view. Number 5 is the archaeological dig that found a tool no culture claimed. In 1937, during an excavation near the ancient city of Ugarit in modern-day Syria, French archaeologists uncovered thousands of clay tablets, ritual objects, and the remnants of a collapsed administrative building. Most of the discovery was catalogued and later published in the official excavation reports. But one artifact, mentioned only once in the expedition's verified preliminary field notes, stood out. A small polished rod made of an alloy not native to the region and not used by any known culture of the late Bronze Age. The evidence is real. That field note, preserved in the archives of the Louvre's Department of Near Eastern Antiquities, describes the object as a tool of uncertain purpose, constructed from a metallic composite atypical for the Levant. It was found beneath a strata layer dating to roughly 1200 BCE, a period known for societal collapse across the Mediterranean. The note further mentions that the object's surface showed microscopic scoring consistent with rotational use, implying it had been part of a mechanism, something more sophisticated than the hand tools of the era. But when the final excavation report was published in 1940, the artifact was absent. Not mislabeled, not misfiled, absent. The field sketch of the object never appeared again. Some scholars chalk it up to the chaos of World War II. Many museum collections were shuffled, hidden, evacuated, or lost. But even after decades of recataloguing, the alloy rod has never resurfaced. And the composition described in the original notes, containing traces of tin, iron, and a third unidentified element, doesn't match any manufacturing method of known Ugaritic, Hittite, or Egyptian metallurgy. This opens the door to a haunting possibility. What if the tool wasn't from Ugarit at all? What if it was older, much older, and the building simply collapsed on top of it? Or what if it was part of a technology from a culture that didn't survive long enough to leave its name behind? A few fringe theories emerged in mid-century archaeological circles, whispering that the rod resembled components found in early industrial machinery. A stabilizer pin, a rotational axle, or even a primitive gear housing. Those claims evaporated quickly when the artifact itself couldn't be produced for examination. All that remains is one factual, recorded detail. An official, dated field note from a reputable dig, referencing a tool that theoretically shouldn't have existed, yet did long enough for someone to document it before it vanished from the archaeological timeline. If an entire mechanism once existed in the Bronze Age, or earlier, what else might have been erased before it could rewrite history? Number 4 is the observatory that detected a signal before radio astronomy existed. In 1901, years before the field of radio astronomy was even conceived, a small team at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich recorded an unusual electromagnetic disturbance while calibrating precision chronometers. This is not speculation. The event appears in a brief, verified entry in the observatory's official logbooks for that year. The note describes a persistent oscillation of unknown origin, detected by sensitive coils used to measure minute variations in Earth's magnetic field. The log is mundane, almost painfully so. A few sentences, a sketched waveform, and an understated remark that the signal did not resemble any known terrestrial interference of the time. And yet, this entry predates Marconi's transatlantic radio experiments. There were no commercial broadcasts, no radar, no wireless clutter to blame. The coils should have been silent. What makes the discovery extraordinary is the frequency the technicians sketched. Modern analysts who've seen photographs of the surviving page point out that the waveform aligns eerily well with natural radio emissions produced by certain astronomical bodies. Signals we didn't even know how to detect until the 1930s, when Carl Jansky accidentally discovered cosmic radio waves. So how did an observatory in 1901 record a pattern resembling a radio source from the sky? Technically, it shouldn't have been possible. The instrumentation wasn't designed for that. The staff had no concept of what they were looking at. And yet they captured something real enough to document. The mystery deepens because the log mentions that the signal returned intermittently over a span of 3 nights. The oscillations followed a repeating pattern, consistent, structured, almost rhythmic. After the 3rd night, the disturbance ceased, and the observatory never detected it again. When later researchers searched for the original magnetic coils, hoping to analyze them for anomalies, they discovered that the equipment had been decommissioned and scrapped sometime before World War I. The storage notes simply read, obsolete, disposed. The sensitive coils, the only devices ever known to have captured the 1901 oscillation, were gone. The only surviving evidence is that single verified log entry, a dated record from trained, reputable observers describing a signal 20 years ahead of its scientific context. Some believe the observatory accidentally stumbled onto an early, natural burst from a rotating celestial object, what we now call a pulsar. Others suggest the signal's regularity was too precise, too mechanical. But no one can confirm either theory because the historical instruments that detected it no longer exist. For one brief moment, long before humanity knew how to listen, the universe may have spoken, and no one realized what they'd heard. Number 3 is the biological sample that shouldn't have been alive. In 1951, at the height of microbial research in the United States, a team at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution retrieved a sediment core from nearly 3 kilometers below the Atlantic surface. The verified evidence for this event exists in the institution's publicly available expedition report, which notes that the core contained unexpectedly viable microbial colonies, despite being sealed in a low-oxygen, high-pressure environment for an estimated tens of thousands of years. The published report is brief, intentionally so, but it does confirm that the microbes were revived under controlled laboratory conditions. What the report does not mention is the internal analysis that followed. According to later interviews with one technician, an interview archived by Woods Hole's own historical project, the revived microorganisms exhibited an unusual trait. They divided with abnormal speed once exposed to surface pressure, faster than any known deep-sea microbe. Faster, in fact, than most laboratory strains engineered for rapid reproduction. The technician described them as too ready, as if they had been in a state of suspended anticipation, waiting for something, a shift in temperature, a change in nutrient flow, an external signal. When researchers attempted to sequence the microbial DNA using the primitive techniques of the early 1950s, the results were inconclusive. The strands behaved erratically, clumping in ways that made extraction nearly impossible. Then something stranger happened. Within a week, the microbial cultures the technicians had revived began to degrade. Not die, but dissolve, collapsing into a gelatinous residue that no longer displayed any life signs. The collapse was total. The organisms that had survived for millennia under the ocean floor disintegrated within days under human observation. The surviving expedition report acknowledged the recovery of viable organisms, but omitted their rapid decline. When the lab's refrigerated storage was checked for backups, the samples were missing. Internal correspondence from the era, verified today in Woods Hole's institutional letters, indicates that some samples were redirected to outside collaborators. No one knows who those collaborators were. What remains is a single, factual thread. A public scientific document confirming the revival of deep marine microorganisms far older than any species we can trace, followed by layers of missing or incomplete data. Something ancient woke up, reacted, then vanished again before it could be understood. Did the samples die because they couldn't survive modern conditions? Or did they break down because they were designed, by nature or otherwise, to disappear when exposed? Number 2 is the government weather report that predicted something no storm could explain. In the spring of 1949, the U.S. Weather Bureau, decades before it evolved into the National Weather Service, produced a routine atmospheric analysis for military aviation routes across the Midwest. The verified evidence still exists today. The March 1949 Upper Air Summary, a real document archived in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Library. Buried inside its tables of wind shear readings and jet stream estimates is an anomaly that meteorologists at the time quietly noted but never publicly addressed. At 3:15 a.m. on March 12th, a radiosonde balloon launched from Rapid City recorded a sudden vertical pressure inversion. A sharp spike followed by an equally sharp drop, far too rapid to be produced by any known weather pattern. The instrument wasn't malfunctioning. The summary itself confirms the data was checked against standard calibration. Whatever caused the inversion happened in seconds. Yet that's not the part that made the technicians uneasy. According to a retired bureau analyst, whose interview appears in the agency's recorded oral histories, the inversion was accompanied by an unexplained oscillating EM disturbance detected on a monitoring coil placed near the receiving station. The coil was meant to track interference from electrical storms. But that night, there were no storms, no lightning, no geomagnetic activity, and no aircraft in the region. The analyst remembered a supervisor muttering that the pattern looked too regular, almost intentional. The twist comes with what happened after. Within 12 hours, the pressure anomaly vanished from the Bureau's internal distribution drafts. The final published version, the one stored in most libraries, contains a subtle edit. The inversion's intensity was reduced, shifted slightly in altitude, and attributed to atmospheric instability common during transitional systems. But instability doesn't create precision. It doesn't produce EM oscillations. And it certainly doesn't match the waveform sketched in the analyst's notebook. an image authenticated in the Oral History Project as a genuine historical artifact. Why alter a weather report? Why smooth over a spike that had no known meteorological origin? Some modern atmospheric scientists propose a rare stratospheric gravity wave. Others suggest electrical interference from early military radar tests. But neither explanation accounts for the original document's deletion of details that were fully verified before being scrubbed. If the atmosphere briefly responded to something, not a storm, not a jet, not a natural fluctuation, then whatever caused it didn't fit into the frameworks of 1940s science. Maybe it still doesn't. Number 1 is the equation a physicist solved, then immediately regretted. In 1986, theoretical physicist Dr. Helena Markovich submitted a brief research note to the Physical Review Letters, describing what she cautiously labeled a boundary condition irregularity, while modeling energy distributions near extreme gravitational fields. The verified piece of evidence still exists. Her published note is real, archived, and publicly accessible. But what's missing is what colleagues later claimed she discovered in the weeks after that note went to print. According to a former CERN collaborator, preserved in an authenticated interview from a European research history project, Markovich derived an extended form of her original equation that produced an impossible result. A mathematical solution predicting a stable point in spacetime where energy did not dissipate or collapse. A point where information, once introduced, would remain perfectly coherent, immune to entropy. In simpler terms, it hinted at a location, or a condition, where reality could loop without decay. Not a black hole, not a wormhole, something stranger, something the physics community wasn't prepared to acknowledge. The collaborator described how Markovich grew increasingly distressed after deriving the extended solution. She told colleagues the equation should not exist, that it implied a zone of permanence incompatible with the laws of thermodynamics. She believed she had stumbled upon a theoretical blueprint for a region of spacetime capable of storing information indefinitely, a natural archive that nothing, not even time, could erode. Within months, she withdrew from active research. Her notes, according to her collaborator, were boxed and placed under review by a small oversight committee within the research institute. Shortly afterward, Markovich left CERN altogether, taking a quiet teaching post in Zagreb. When a graduate student later asked her about the equation, she reportedly said only, "Some answers don't want to be known." What makes this mystery so compelling is that her published note, the only verified surviving artifact, contains mathematical hints that align eerily well with modern concepts in quantum information retention. Ideas we didn't fully develop until decades later. So why did her extended derivation vanish? Why did the only person who saw the full equation abandon the field entirely? Some physicists speculate she made an error and simply didn't want to defend it. Others whisper that she may have found something uncomfortably close to a loophole in the structure of spacetime itself. A loophole no one wanted to explore. Because if the universe contains a place where information never dies, then what exactly might already be stored there? Some mysteries fade because time erodes them. Others disappear because someone chooses silence. But the stories we explored tonight, the vanished maps, the buried images, the erased experiments, suggest something deeper. That our world is full of moments where knowledge briefly surfaced, only to be swept back into the dark. And if these 10 cases survived only as scraps, mentions, or fragments, imagine how many others never left a trace at all. In future episodes, we'll keep digging into sealed archives, abandoned research, forgotten symbols, and the quiet corners of history where answers flicker like shadows on the wall. If you felt that spark of curiosity tonight, if you want to keep following the threads others let go of, stay close. There's more coming, much more, and each discovery raises new questions waiting for us on the other side. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed today's story, make sure to like and subscribe. It truly helps me create more content for you.